Hey guys, so my hand, number one, is better now. I can actually close it and make a fist with minimal pain. Some pain, but minimal pain. So I've been able to actually do some sort of stuff that is coming up soon. I owe some people some footage that I really need to get up. And I am behind on stuff that way behind. I've already been behind, but I'm way behind on stuff on the channel. So to try to kick things off, I want to at least put this video out and then get back to work. So when I can, because this is one of the rare moments where I actually have a little bit of free time. So let's get on with it. So a question that keeps coming up is on the effectiveness of Chinese martial arts. Get it all the time, and I've actually answered it several times on this channel in various ways. And just recently, literally just a couple of days ago, I get somebody asking me, how effective are Chinese martial arts really? To be a little bit more specific. And by the way, they asked it in a very genuine manner. They weren't being snarky. They weren't, they were just genuinely wanting to know. And the term they used, they asked, is Kung Fu actually used in the UFC at all? Like from what they've seen in the movies and what they've seen demonstrated as, martial arts technique, they don't seem to be all that effective. And then when you look at the UFC, it doesn't seem like there's any Kung Fu practitioners there. So they were just wondering, is there any Kung Fu being used in the ring at all? Now, again, I have answered this before, but I'm going to go into it again because I'm not too sure. I've made so many freaking videos. Sometimes I just forget. Well, actually, I'm kind of going at this at a slightly different angle than before. So if I have answered this before, some things I'm going to repeat, but there's other things that I won't. So hopefully this won't be too boring of a video for the rest of you. First of all, I need to point out the term Kung Fu, which is what they've used. Usually when I answer this question, I always say Chinese martial arts rather than Kung Fu. And yes, I know Kung Fu is the term that a lot of people are familiar with when it comes to Chinese fighting systems, but technically speaking, Kung Fu is not the term used for fighting arts. The term Kung Fu just means skill acquired over time, or really more accurately, it's skill acquired through time and effort, through hard work. If you've developed a high level of skill in something after a long period of study and practice and effort, then you are said to have Kung Fu in that particular area, in that particular field or art or practice or whatever. So, I mean, I could be kind of, could be a bit of a smartass and say that if we're going to be using that definition, then yes, there's Kung Fu being used in the UFC all the time because everybody over there has a high level of skill in what they're doing, a high level of skill in what they're doing. So, but that's not really the question being asked. They're talking about Chinese martial arts, which is the term I use when describing the various fighting systems that have come from China. And I say various fighting systems because there are a whole lot of Chinese martial arts systems. When we're saying Chinese martial arts, then we got to narrow down which one are we talking about. A whole lot of them. It's not like, you could say, oh, this area only has, and that's another misconception. Japan has like karate and judo, and that's it. Not understanding that karate itself has several different styles in it, or several different systems or different ways of portraying it. And then you got their different grappling systems. You got judo, but then you also got jujitsu, and you got aikido. So you got all these different fighting styles, and this is not even going into European fighting systems, boxing, wrestling, and as much as people say, well, there's only one boxing system. Well, depending on where you go, they might change up their combat theory or technique a little bit, and there's a different system. Like, ask anybody who's really into boxing. They'll tell you, oh yeah, there's there's Mexican boxers and they box this way. There's like Russian boxers, they box this way. They got a different way of going about it. Even in the U.S., you got different systems depending on what part of the U.S. you're in. So, and then there's different ways and different defense. I'm pretty sure you've heard of the Philly, shell and all this. So you got all these different things. But in general terms, people, when they think of Chinese martial arts, they're just generally thinking of like just all the arts in general, or just a general overview of what they consider to be Chinese fighting technique. Is any of it being used in the ring at all? Short answer is very little of it, though we're seeing more of it all the time. The long answer is a little bit more complicated. Here's the thing. Chinese martial fighting systems, when they're used in an effective way, really aren't all that different looking from other effective fighting systems. Believe it or not. I mean, yeah, you might catch a couple of movements here and there where you might go, oh, that definitely is a more Chinese way of doing things. Or, yeah, I definitely don't see this type of thing being used in other systems. But it's like a few techniques here and there. But for the most part, when you see somebody using Chinese martial arts effectively, you're not really going to be seeing things too much different from what you might see somebody in Muay Thai doing, or somebody in, somebody using kickboxing techniques, somebody using certain hand skills in boxing, certain, karate techniques. You're going to see a lot of overlap because at the end of the day, there's only so many ways you can throw an effective punch. There's only so many ways you can throw an effective kick. And you will see this kind of crossover. We're seeing it now, actually. If you look at Sanda, for instance, which is the Chinese fighting sport, you're going to look at it and it's going to seem to you not much different from kickboxing with tripping in it or, with certain throws and knockdowns in it. There's not going to be like, necessarily a UFC rolling around on the ground type stuff. But as far as standing up and fighting and throwing strikes, you're going to see moves in there that look like Muay Thai. You're going to see moves in there that look like kickboxing. You're going to see moves in there that look like boxing, just straight up. And granted, they do pick up techniques from the systems, but there's a kung fu in there as well. Or should I say Chinese martial arts stuff thrown in there as well. In fact, you know what? Just for messing around, I'm putting up a clip here. This is me and my son just kind of sparring, very light sparring, just messing around in the living room. And yeah, I know there's not that much space in here, but we were just kind of messing around, just kind of going light, nothing too serious. But I'm going to be using very simple stuff. And you're going to notice that what I'm doing really isn't all that exotic. I'm going very simple, just basic straight punches, backhands, some low line kicks, some mid level kicks. And I must stress to you guys, I have never trained in boxing. I've never trained in any Japanese fighting systems. I have not trained in any Muay Thai systems. I have not trained in judo. I have not done Western wrestling. I've not done any of that stuff. Everything that you're seeing me do right here is stuff that I learned from the Chinese instructors that I've had. Do you see anything in there that makes you go, that's Chinese martial arts? I mean, those of you with an eye for that sort of thing might go, oh, I recognize that. Or yeah, you did that probably not all that well. I'm not saying I'm an expert or anything. By the way, I must stress this. You're not seeing high level technique here. But what you are seeing are the techniques that I've been taught from Chinese systems being done in a very straightforward, lighthearted, mind you, but straightforward sort of way. You're not really seeing anything all that crazy, are you? Because effective fighting is effective fighting no matter what. So when you look at it from that context, and then you start looking at UFC fighting, you may begin to understand that it becomes a little bit of a tricky question when you start saying, hey, all right, Chinese martial arts being used effectively in the UFC. I mean, we have very few people going into the ring saying, I study long fist. I'm the long fist representative, and now I'm jumping into the UFC. First of all, the UFC is mixed martial arts, so that means you're going to be getting people in there who are training in a variety of systems, usually 3, maybe 4. Like they got a background in different systems, and they're mixing it up, and that becomes their own personal style. And some of the people that you're seeing in there doing what they're doing, some of them may have picked up a little bit of Wing Chun, or some of them may have picked up a little bit of long fist styles. And then even long fist as a general term. What form of long fist are you studying? Are you studying Plum Blossom Fist? Are you studying Cha Chuan? Are you, studying, Northern Mantis? What long fist system? I would love to see, by the way, like a Tong Bei practitioner in the UFC. That would be interesting, but that's neither here nor there. I have heard some people try to claim that Anderson Silva has some background in Chinese martial arts, but I haven't really seen any evidence of that, so I don't think that's a good guy to use to prove that. Though I will point out that he has trained in capoeira, and well, people used to say capoeira sucks in the ring. He's used some of it. I mean, and some other people have used it well, which leads me to something else that I wanted to point out before I get to my last point about Chinese martial arts in the ring. Well, second to last point. We got a couple of others. One thing that I've been noticing about UFC fighting over the years is how things have changed in it with very little discussion or acknowledgement about those changes. When people were first looking at mixed martial arts fights, the common viewpoint was that grappling will defeat all striking. Like, you have to take grappling because you have to be a wrestler, you have to have the judo background and all that, because once you have that, all strikers are going to melt. You know, like, nobody's going to stand a chance if they don't have wrestling. Strikers will never win. You're always going to win by pounding them to the ground. That was what was said in the early years. And then we started seeing strikers winning by knockout. No, I mean, granted, people are still saying that you should have some grappling because you have to have some way of countering grappling. But we have noticed lately that there are some people going in there who are more strikers than grapplers, and they can win fights. They can hold their own as long as they're able to counter the grappling techniques and win the way they want to win. They're going to make it. Then I used to hear things like, oh, Muay Thai style kicks are the only type of kicks that are going to work. You can't really use things like side kicks or spinning kicks. None of that crap works. And now we're seeing people winning with spinning kicks and high kicks and tricky type Taekwondo style kicks. But before, people saying, oh, none of that stuff's going to work. Here I am seeing it work. And I wasn't surprised by any of it. And the reason why I'm not surprised by any of this, oh, another thing was spinning strikes are never going to work. And now we're seeing spinning elbows and spinning backhands and spinning kicks working. People, what the hell? Because it's something that I've known that the people who are saying this don't know. As long as you know how the techniques work, you can make it effective. If you train in it to make it work, and it was rooted in combat principles to begin with, it's going to work. The problem is, a lot of people teaching these things don't know how to make it work. You have a lot of instructors who they train in forms and they train in kicking and punching in the air, but not against an opponent that is going to try to counter what you're doing. If you're used to doing your techniques against somebody who's just going to let you do it, you're not going to know how to apply it against someone who's trying to keep you from doing it, which shouldn't be surprising to anybody claiming to know anything about practical fighting, because they tend to say that all the time. You got to go up against a live opponent. You got to go up against a resisting opponent. They love echoing that. But a lot of the people echoing this never been in a fight. Here is where I have to stress something that's probably going to annoy some people. But it's true, and it needs to be said. So many people championing UFC fights and talking about what's effective and what's not effective never fought. They've never been in a street fight. They've never stepped in a ring. They've never trained in any real martial arts for any long period of time. They're just armchair commentators championing their favorite sport. But they've never actually had to test their own fists in a situation, whether it be in a sparring situation or a situation where they might lose some teeth. They've never been there. They're just echoing stuff. So a lot of the time, I hate to say it, they're echoing stuff that they hear that makes them feel good because it's about something that they happen to have an emotional stake in, but they don't really know what they're talking about. And I bump into this a lot with certain comments that I see online. It's saying a lot, and I'm just like, okay, later on, time will prove this wrong. And in terms of certain techniques that are working in the ring and not in the ring, time's proven that wrong a lot. So people, I think, are going to kind of need to get off their high horse for a bit and remember that the martial arts that they're disparaging, whether it be Chinese ones or Korean ones or whatever, have been around for a long period of time, and they used to be used by people who were using this to stay alive. Okay? I don't want to disparage martial arts that have been around for a long period of time, because if they've lasted for a long period of time, there must have been a good reason for it. And that's because when it was being used by people who had to use it to put food on the table and to keep their head on their shoulders, they obviously were using it in a way that was making that happen. These arts were effective at some point. So what the hell happened then? Why is it that nowadays we're looking at arts and we're like, this doesn't seem effective, or I don't think this is going to work? Well, we don't really practice martial arts for that anymore. I mean, modern martial arts, sure, there are a lot of guys who, yeah, I'm going to go into the MMA so I can learn how to knock somebody out. But there's more effective ways to defend yourself these days. I'm pretty sure you've heard of guns. They're quite effective. Pretty sure you've heard of pepper spray if in terms, or like, mace or whatever. Those things can be effective, or tasers, things to stop somebody from attacking you personally. These things are effective, okay? And I mean, granted, there's also people who jump into learning martial arts because they just want to get that domination factor. They want to be big and bad and have that chip on their shoulders, which that's always been around, yeah, but that's not really a good reason to learn these things. And then there are those who train in these arts because they like the flashy stuff, and unfortunately, a lot of the instructors teaching them this stuff, all they know is the flashy stuff. All they know is how to look good, but not how to actually fight. And this has been a problem with Chinese martial arts for a very long period of time, to the point where there is a very famous quote about such so-called masters. Flowery fists and embroidered legs. I'm pretty sure you guys have heard of that before if you've spent any amount of time researching Chinese martial arts sayings and teachings. It's a way to disparage somebody who doesn't know how to fight. Flowery fists and embroidered legs. It's a big problem. But you see this with a lot of different martial arts. And these days, since they're really, I mean, let's be fair. Unless you happen to be living in a war-torn country and heaven protect those living in such an area right now. Jeez. Unless you're living in a place like that, you're not living in a place where you really need to know this stuff. We do it for recreation, more or less. If you're using it to actually get in the ring and straight up fight so you can put money on the table, that's one thing. Or if you want to learn how to fight effectively and it's a way for you to keep in shape, as well as have some fun sparring with people, because honestly, sparring is fun. I mean, you saw the clips with me and my son. We were having fun. It is fun. Unless you're doing it for that, we don't really need this. It's not like a capital N need in terms of, I got to find some way to defend myself. Personally, I think that people should learn at least a little bit of this to defend themselves. I really think it's one of the core things you should learn. Like if anyone was to ask me, what life skills should you have? Like, you need to know how to cook. You need to be handy with tools. How to fix certain things. And I think another thing you need to learn is basic self-defense. You need to know how to use your hands. Okay, I'm just saying. That's me. But as far as being some martial arts mastering a system, we don't really need that. So in an environment where you don't really need that, you're going to have a whole lot of instructors who themselves never really fought. They might have inherited a system. They might have been really, really good at doing their forms, and they might have made their brain an encyclopedia of the techniques of that style. And the guy who taught them is like, yeah, I guess you'll be the next generation person representing the style because you do know it all. But the guy may never fought. And this is where the problem starts. First you get the guys who actually fought. Then you get your pioneers who innovate on those fighting systems. And then you get the technicians, and then the people after them tend to be the guys who they don't fight. They learn under the technician, and they learn all the really crazy fancy type stuff. Like, here's another and really interesting way to do this particular technique, but they might not even understand how to do the basic one effectively. And these are the guys who are representing your art. And now you guys should be getting an idea of why it is that people now look at traditional arts and go, oh, that stuff isn't effective, because the people representing them have not tested the techniques, and they're focusing a lot on the stuff that is a little extra, the fancier stuff, the flashy jumping double, triple spinning kicks, the really interesting movement of the hands, and all this other kind of crazy stuff. And they might be able to demonstrate it in a very stilted way against from somebody just standing there saying, do it to me. But they don't know how to just fight in a straightforward manner and know how to apply it. But now we look at the UFC where you better know how to do it or else, and it's forcing people to re-examine techniques that they've learned. Now in the beginning, people were just discarding techniques. None of this stuff works. But then later on, the people who actually have some fighting background who have trained in those techniques, like, wait a second, I know I can make this work. I'm pretty sure. And then they make it work. They're rediscovering techniques that have already been around, or they're rediscovering how to employ them. And this is happening in the Chinese martial arts. Some people may not be aware of this, but there are a whole lot of people in China right now who are jumping into the ring with a Sanda background. Yeah, they're studying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and they're studying Muay Thai, but they also got Sanda, which has been China's fighting sport for a while, which has Chinese martial arts skills and techniques in there. They're showing up. They're now in the ring. They're getting results. Don't believe me? Look it up. They're there. They're showing up. I mean, we're not necessarily seeing like, I guess we're waiting for the first breakout star, I guess, but they're there. They're holding their own. There's also a couple of YouTube channels of dudes with some Chinese martial arts backgrounds getting into the ring and holding their own. They're able to do things like counter grapples. They're doing things like being able to slip and bob and weave and stuff like that. They're testing their skills and they're getting in there and they're applying them. And they are also incorporating techniques from other styles, which some people may be surprised to find out has been going on in China for a long period of time. It's part of the reason why there are so many styles. You'll have somebody from one particular school going to another particular school and like, hey, I like that technique. I'm going to take that. That's MMA. That's mixed martial arts. You're mixing different systems. Just because those martial arts happen to be in the same continent doesn't necessarily mean you're not mixing different things. Bagua, the guy who founded it, was training other fighters in his method. So that means they already knew something before they came to him. What do you think that is? That's mixed martial arts. Am I wrong? Yin Fu was a long fist practitioner. He studied supposedly like Shaolin long fist. He was mostly a striker. And then he picked up the techniques of Bagua later on and developed his own Bagua system over it. Yin style Bagua. Cheng style Bagua was because that came from a founder who studied wrestling before he went in there. This stuff, mixing skills and developing new skills, is something that happens in martial arts all the time. It happened in China too. It's happening now in the UFC. And techniques that people say, that doesn't work. It's already working. It's already happening. Little by little. Time will prove me right on this because it already has. I'm already seeing things that people said, this stuff never worked. Now it's working. I wonder why. Because you're getting people with more talent and more skill in the techniques they're learning and are able to employ it effectively. One last thing, though. We need to be careful when using the UFC as a barometer for martial arts skill. I do think that overall, if you claim that you're able to throw hands and you're claiming to be some great expert, but then you step in the UFC and you instantly get completely annihilated, that should call your skills into question. I'm not going to deny that. But we must also remember that just because it is called ultimate fighting doesn't mean that it's actually ultimate fighting. There are still rules that need to be followed. Remember, it is a sport, not a life or death situation. There is a completely different sense of mentality. The context changes once you go from fighting in the ring to fighting in the street, or worse, fighting in a life or death situation. Ask any Marine if fighting in the ring is the same as in a combat freaking situation. I'm quite certain they'll tell you there's some differences. The mentality changes, the techniques you're going to use change, that no holds barred stuff. The whole vibe is different. And that will alter how you fight, what your mind state is. The UFC is a good place to test your overall understanding of combat and techniques and your talent. And generally, when you're sparring with people, or even if you're in a competition with people, there's a certain modulation of techniques you need to have. And your ability to, you know, temper the blows you're throwing or change up your techniques shows that you've mastered it. Like somebody who cannot control how they throw their fists or their feet, yeah, that's somebody who hasn't really fully understood their style yet. They haven't mastered themselves yet. So yeah, the guys who are going around saying, "Oh, I can't go in the ring. I might kill you." Yeah, yeah, whatever. But there is a kernel of truth to that. Yeah, I laugh at those guys too because usually it's somebody's like this special cheat technique. Whatever, dude. Go on, leave me alone. But there still are certain things you can't do in the ring because of the damage they might do. Come on, you know it's true. There are rules. There's certain things you can't do in the ring for obvious freaking reasons that are, quite frankly, normal in martial art, like straight up, you know, life or death situations or like street situations. You'd be surprised how many traditional martial arts strategies just boil down to kick them in the nuts. Make them look this way, kick them in the nuts. You can't do that in the UFC. That's called dirty fighting. You're not supposed to be poking to the eyes. And yes, I know a poke to the eyes isn't lethal, but you're still not allowed to do it in the UFC for obvious reasons. You can't do elbows to the back of somebody's head right there where the brainstem is for obvious reasons. There's certain ways that you grapple and throw people to the ground that will look unsportsmanlike or highly suspect if you do that. It's a different mentality. This is not saying that, oh, UFC guys can't fight. We know they can fight. I'm just saying you have to understand there's different levels to this. And to kind of go back to the Chinese martial arts question, a lot of Chinese martial arts systems are not made to fight in the ring. They're made to keep your head on your shoulders. And a lot of the techniques they may train in, they may find that other than basic kicking, punching, and throwing, a lot of the other stuff that they do doesn't translate there. And they got to find a way to translate it. Some people can do it. Some people are just full of crap. And some people are figuring it out. That's the long, complicated answer to that particular question, which, again, I've answered it before. I hope you guys found this particularly enlightening, but to sum up, in terms of like, are we seeing pure Chinese martial artists jumping into the UFC? There's little of that. But are we seeing basic effective techniques being employed effectively that you can see in Chinese martial arts? Yeah. Are there people with Chinese martial arts backgrounds who are showing up in the UFC? Yeah. Can many of the techniques we see be effective? Yes, just not in the way that we see in the movies. Never use the movies, by the way, as the representative of a particular fighting art. You're going to always be sorely disappointed. With some exceptions, though. I should do a video on the directors I actually like, who I think did a good job of portraying the skills, but that's a whole other topic. Anyway, enough of that. This video is longer than I thought it was going to be. Hope you guys found it interesting. Catch you guys later.